Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is part 9 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book, The Art of the Argument, Western Civilization's Last Stand. And last time we checked the chapters around argument as civilization and the argument and charity. And it's not really very interesting as such. It's sort of this jumping between, let's say, abstract philosophy and then into a mix of history and politics and religion and prejudice and all sorts of understanding of how society works. And this is this all over the place mentality it's like he's living in his own mind, right? And just slapping it on paper, and then here it is, right? It's not exactly, it's possibly quite common this way, but a sign of a very good philosopher, in my opinion, is one who has an insight into how things are perceived or understood when read, and how that carries along to the next argument and the next argument and the next argument. This sensitivity to carry the reader along, to making sure that they are on track with where you are in your thinking, both when you wrote the book, but also in all generality, which is this writing is supposed to be a representation of. This doesn't really work that well in this book, right? It's kind of all over the place. And this is more or less, or I should say, sophistry to one degree or another, right? That if you are all over the place, you will kind of halfway lose your reader, but the reader will still be there trying to make sense of what you're saying. And that, if you're good as a sophist, that sense they will make of what they can get out of what you write is the underlying agenda, not the necessarily the explicit words, but the underlying agenda underneath that you're sort of sensitive to, possibly when you're reading the stuff. And this form of, there's something beneath, but it's not explicitly stated. This is basically sophistry, right? So, and this is ripe with it, in my opinion, right? It's just a pretense of philosophy that is used to pushing your personal agenda. That's all I can say, really, right? So I can never take this serious in any way I would understand as philosophically serious, right? There's been a very few passages here and there where I said, okay, this is decent, but it usually isn't anything that I haven't sort of been around in my thinking at some point or another, right? There was a comparison earlier about predators and prey and deduction and induction. I thought that was an interesting approach. I have never thought of that before. I never heard of it. And maybe it is there's nothing there. I haven't sort of sat down and tried to figure something out myself along those lines. But that's the only time I specifically remember. That's an possible insight that I have never drawn that comparison, right? So those are interesting. At least they're interesting. I'm not eating them raw. I'll have to go and do my own thinking along those lines to figure out if there's actually something there, right? Okay, but I highlighted a few things in the last part that I'll go and mention. I'll hope not to go too far with these, so get on with the chapters, so we could get to some part of the book that is a bit more meaty than this sort of loose talk here, right? And there's a passage here where he says, sentence, "We all possess an animalistic side that seeks power over others, over resources. We seek power over others so we can control resources. The power over others is a tool to get power over resources or access to resources, right? And it says, curbing this side is the essential task of civilization. But now he's saying all individuals. He's saying specifically, we all possess. That is all individuals. It's not the cows or the rocks or the lakes. Well, it must be human beings, right? And every single one of us, is his claim, is an animalistic sort of gut reaction sort of thing. We seek power over others to get power over resources. But if there's nothing but individuals in what you call a civilization, so you are violating the idea of civilization. That's a collective category for something that doesn't exist. You can't give civilization a task, right? Because it doesn't exist. What color does civilization have? Or does it have a color, I should say? Does it have a taste? Does it have a sound? Does it have a feel? Does it have a smell? Well, if civilization does not have any of these, it does not exist. So you can't give it a task, right? So it's sort of more metaphorical, and this is where we get into these terms and labels that are being manipulated. And sometimes I'm, for lack of a better term, you use the sort of in society or in civilization or in humanity and sort to mean that you're not just talking about one person or three persons or 10 persons, you're talking about any possible individual. But you can't say that that label which you are put on a number of people is given a task or has an essential task. Now that's where the manipulation comes in, and he's possibly aware of this. He has even mentioned it early in the book that this is what they do. They collectivize individual into a group, and then they say the group, a group that can't speak for itself, and then some people appoint themselves as spokespersons for this group, and then they have the power over the group, right? So the thing he's trying to point out is basically the same thing he's trying to attempt here, getting some kind of power over the group of people that he's influencing, right? So he said, personally, I don't think I have that animalistic side of seeking power over others. I really, really don't, right? I don't want power over other people. What would that be, right? What would that power be? It's not very clearly defined what that power is, right? Is it a power that says, you must do what I say, or what? Why should they? Why should they say, fuck off, you weird person, right? What is that power? How is that manifested? Power doesn't exist in the world, right? What color does power have? A color? Does it have a sound? Yeah, you can do that test every time to figure out if some reference is empirical, right? My guidance would be, do that little trick to figure out whether or not that reference is to something that you can experience, right? So, and the point is, when people point to something that sounds like it exists, but it doesn't exist, people are sort of confused, and they want somebody to tell them what it is. And that's what those people in power want you to come and ask what it is. And then they say, oh, well, that is this and that is that. And they will use all their sophisticated linguistic skills to sort of gaslight you into thinking this or that or the other, right? Just do this little trick. Or it's not a trick, it's a fundamental philosophy. Does it does it have a color? Does it have a sound? Does it have a feel? Does it have a taste? Does it have a smell? Right? If none of these are the case, and I would say you actually have to have a visual to say that it exists, right? But that could be up for debate. That's the test I use to figure out whether or not something is empirical. Well, if it's not empirical, right, then it's not going to attack me, right? It's not going to steal my money. It's not going to, violate my kids or abuse my kids or, whatever, steal my car or do anything. a mental picture can't do anything. Only individuals, possibly suffering from some illusions about what exists and what doesn't exist, can do something to me, right? We are leaving out, lightning strikes or predatory animals or anything that could do something to my. Let's just talk about human beings in this context here, right? So this is important that this is something that Stefan Molyneux balances. He jumps from one. It has to be empirical, and then he starts to talk about civilization's essential task. What the hell is that, right? It cannot possibly be empirical. So why is he talking about it? What is he saying, right? And then there's this domination, a submission, and surrendering. I don't like that at all, right? It has religious connotation. It has domination, the power of the state and the violence these people want to inflict on you, right? It's along the same kind of mentality, right? He says we either surrender to facts or we must be forced to surrender to each other. Well, there might be something very important hidden in this statement, right? I have to put on my power cord. Hang on a sec. Otherwise, I'll run out of juice. So let's see if it works. Hopefully. Yes. And, where did it go? Surrender to facts, surrender to each other. I'm not sure that's a correct dichotomy, but I'll let that pass, right? Surrender to facts. What is a fact? I'm not surrender. If I experience an elephant, I draw on this elephant all the time, right? Pull the old elephant out. If I say that's an elephant, okay, that's an elephant. I don't have to say it if I'm alone. I'm just experiencing and sort of in my head saying, if I made that proposition, it would be true to me, right? I don't have to make the proposition in order for me to have the fact elephant. I'm an experienced elephant over there, let's say, right? So that's a fact. You can call elephant the fact. Why would I surrender in any? What am I doing when I'm surrendering to that fact? Right? It just makes no sense when you sort of deconstruct it and put things there and sort it out and sort of. Then the term surrender becomes sort of meaningless, right? Is it sort of you have to, if there's an elephant or any kind of fact, you have to sort of accept it as impending or imposing knowledge on you, because there's nothing that says that just because you have a cognitive apparatus that cognizes elephant in that part of your experience, that there should be an elephant, right? I mean, I'm convinced of the elephant, and I will treat it as if there is an elephant, because that's the only rational thing to do, right? And if there's no elephant, okay, it's better than me pretending that there isn't an elephant, that when there actually is an elephant, right? So taking it seriously is what we do. We're sort of fear-based creatures, right? But I'm not surrendering to anything. I'm just okay. I'm start to rationalize. If I experienced elephant out there, sort of 10, 15, 20 meters outside my window, I would start to rationalize possibly, okay, if it turns around and walks this way and bursts through my windows and my door and so on, what would I do? So sort of this kind of rationale. I'm not surrendering anything. Actually, one of the terms I would never use in this context would be surrender. I would actually be proactive in some way, right? I would be rationalizing. I wouldn't surrender and lay down and say, I give up, right? That's stupid. Okay, then there's, we are either dominated by reality or by force and lies. Well, that's this we again, right? It's all over the place, this we. He never talks about himself. He always talks about we. That's collectivist, in basically an underlying mentality, which is collectivist. It's a collectivist fallacy, right? We are either dominated by reality or by force and lies. Is that a correct dichotomy? I don't know, right? Dominated by reality, we are surrendering to the domination of facts and reality, otherwise by force and lies. But are those, as I said earlier in the last part, that force and lies, is that not a part of reality? Those people inflicting that force and those lies, aren't they a part of that reality? Should be dominated by that reality, or aren't they part of reality? Then where the hell are they, right? So when you try to deconstruct it, that's why this kind of deconstruction is such a good exercise, right? And you are walking through the context of what it's talking about, right? So that there's no getaway possibility when you're taking everything in, right? So it's like, and then a reference to a song, you have to serve somebody. Bullshit, right? Just because somebody said that in a song, I know it's just mainstream, or what's it called, easygoing way of reminding people of something, right? And there can be some wise things or interesting philosophical aspects of some lyrics in some songs and so on, right? I have a very a big favorite of mine, which is an old glam band from the 70s, which most people don't know about, but they were actually pretty great, right? Pretty good. They weren't great in the sense they sold, and they had their peak in the mid 70s, and then they sort of faded away a bit, right? And they have become sort of a cult. But they have they are sort of edgy in their lyrics and so on, and their image and so on. And they have a particularly one song that I like very much that has this sort of philosophical asking questions. So I like that very much. But be careful not to use it sort of on the fly to justify any kind of philosophical statement. It has to be put aside, right? So it's a quote and who said it and so on, right? But this combination of reality or force and lies, that means force and lies are outside reality. But if it's not a part of reality, how do we experience it? So it's this annoying, stupid, ridiculously bad philosophy, right? It is so bad, right? It's so bad. He's working from a paradigm that where things are not put together the right way, right? He built some sort of Lego philosophy, and things stick out and pieces missing and so on. And then he thinks he's created the answer to everything for all time. And a statement like this just points out how little insight he really has, right? There might be some truth in it in the way that he has made some observations and so on, but the way he puts it together makes it sound ridiculous, right? So dominated by reality or force and lies. It's stupid, right? Can't take it seriously. Even if it's potentially based on something that is serious. I have to reject it now, right? And good to say, we should submit to reason and evidence, right? Submit to reason and evidence, right? What would that be? Okay, so if I'm saying, okay, there's I'm starting to feel hungry, let's say, right? Okay, so I'll start to reason about that. That would be rationality, in my opinion, because it's reasoning about something that is value creation, right? Or potentially, at least, right? Okay, so when I submit myself to some reason and evidence, even if I'm reasoning, I say, okay, I think I'm going to the fridge and see if there's something there. Or I go down. I mean, submitting? I'm not submitting, right? I'm just doing it, right? I'm just rationalizing. And evidence, yes, I will. The evidence is that I can find my fridge, right? If I can find my fridge, I can open it. The fridge is an evidence of where the food might be, right? So I'm going to the fridge, opening the fridge, and there the food is. So the fridge is the evidence. Am I submitting myself to my fridge? Well, what is it? What are you saying, right? Oh, but he has these large sweeping statements about the universality and, hey, submitting yourself to the evidence of the universe, something like that, right? Well, that doesn't work in your everyday if you need to go to your fridge, right? So it's just these imbalances about he's also, so what is it, not moving the goalpost, but if you argue here, he'll start arguing here also. This is the important, and if you go over there, and then you jump back and say, oh no, it's important over here. It's sort of this rabbit you can't catch, right? A philosophical rabbit you can never get your head around, because he will never state anything so clearly that you feel that, well, yes, okay, he's standing straight and saying, this is how I define this, right? Okay, philosophical standards must be defended through ostracism. I don't know why it's necessary to defend through ostracism philosophical standards. Philosophy is the thinking you do in order to figure out whether or not your normal thinking, let's say, is optimal, right? Or as optimal as you want it to be, right? From your own subjective standard. So when you start to philosophize, you don't just figure out how to get to work, but you start to think about what is working, or should I do the work I do, or should I find some other work? That's kind of philosophy, right? When you start to lift yourself up above your everyday thinking and think about how you normally think, then all these philosophical questions starts to appear inevitably, right? That's basically what it is, right? So what's a philosophical standard? Is that reason, evidence? Huh? Must they be defended through ostracism? Does that mean that if I'm submitting myself to my fridge, if that's a philosophical standard, can I defend that through ostracism? Can I say, well, if I'm going to that fridge and therefore I must ostracize you, something like that? I'm just taking it down a step or two to reality where I'm working in my daily life and how this sort of high-flying philosophy fits into my everyday, right? And then you will sort of say, no, you have to be up in my clouds up here, talk about the great lines and, preferability and universality and behaviors and all. So it never comes down to everyday, daily life where you can, your fridge. Your fridge is possibly one of the most important objects in your life, right? If you didn't have that, you would have to find new food every day. Now you only have to find food every other day, 3 or 4 days, maybe even a week, if you're good at planning, right? So, I mean, it's just, what are we talking about down in everyday reality? Because that's where people are. They are not living in these clouds, right? All right, let's see. Then there was the decay of assertiveness in our, then again, it's our intellectual classes is the fundamental undoing of our civilization. And this is also a very sophist way of putting words. It's not sort of keeping it the licks number down in order to make sure that the reader understands it. No. He wants to sound intellectual and smart and sort of a word wizard, right? He likes to extend himself as a word wizard. It makes him feel good. I'm absolutely convinced that it's more important that he feel good about how he puts words together than making sure that the reader actually understands and get the point he's trying to put across. The decay of assertiveness in our intellect. So the intellectual classes must be more assertive. What would that be? Is that an argument? Should they argue? Why are you not saying arguments then? And if it's the argument, content of the argument, should they be more based on evidence, or what is it, right? Assertiveness. It's so weak. It's such a weak term, right? That you can put almost anything into it that you want as a reader. And maybe that's exactly what he wants. He wants to bring everybody in who can. If you're very sharp in your definitions and how you express it, you are not letting people add themselves what they want to add. You are controlling what you mean by what you say. So you are weeding out all these people. If you're a rigid philosopher, then you will be weeding out all these people who actually want to put their own dots into the story, right? And a good philosopher would make sure that the dots are philosophically rigid and they are very well defined and not sort of a gray area weasel word, right? To make sure that it's strictly, this is how it should be understood, right? And then there's sort of in our collective, destroy our collective harmony. Destroying collective, he's talking about singers, but that's an analogy or metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for there are some people who are destroying the collective harmony, right? Now, this has a clear undertone, right? You understand, right? It's like we have reached the point where we have to say, are we going to fight to the death for the way we want to live? Or those of us who want to live the same way, should we band together and fight to the death against those who want to impinge on our way of living? Right? That's the undertone, right? And I'm not going to tell anybody what they should do, right? But what he's doing is sort of a sophist trick to, start the burners beneath you, and sort of put some fuel to the fire, and rebel rouse and so on, right? You understand where I'm getting at, right? I don't like that. I don't fucking like to be manipulated this way, right? And if this was not labeled as philosophy, and he claims to be the greatest philosophy show in the world, which is a weasel way of saying he considers himself the greatest philosopher of all time so far, right? I wouldn't care that much, but it has been labeled as philosophy. Then I'm going to try to take it down, right? As best I can. I will give the credit where credit is due, but I'm going to pull it down wherever I can if I feel that it's needed. Okay. Encouraging the incompetent to wage war in the realm of the argument compromises the battle entirely. Yeah, well, I did spend some time on that one in the past one, so I'm not going to do it here. But again, it's sort of a fall off from this one up here, right? So they are not those weak people who are destroying collective harmony. They're incompetent, and they can't. They are not with us. They are basically against us because they're so weak, right? So this rhetoric is toxic. Like, I don't like the word toxic. It's manipulative, right? Very, very emotionally manipulative. Okay. Then there's, however, if people are not trained in the discipline of rational argumentation, they cannot tell the difference between reasoning and manipulation. Okay, so this is a book stuffed to the brim with manipulation, right? And very little reasoning about arguing, which is based on reasoning, apparently, right? And logic and reasoning, right? Deductive, inductive, and so on, right? And then he can't tell the difference between reasoning and manipulation. And then he's sort of making this bold statement that these people are, they have to be trained in the discipline of rational. It rubs me the wrong way, right? Okay. Then there's the argument of charity. I don't remember exactly why I highlighted advantage of. Let's quit that one. And that is, it is merely a question of universality. Irresponsible can only be subsidized. Yeah, okay. That was one I agreed with. So we can go back and listen to that one, right? And okay, there we are. The next one is charity and the division of kindness. And let's head into that one. I just remember I wanted to say that I'm trying to optimize my way of speaking, trying to slow down maybe a little, because sometimes I seem to get ahead of myself, and my second language cannot always keep up. And even if I think it sounds decently when I express it, when I listen to it afterwards, I can hear that it goes too fast, right? And then I lose a bit of words here and there, and then it gets a little confusing for a listener. Now, this is it's a free service I give to you, and you can listen all you want, and I'm doing the work for you if you wanted to deconstruct this book and so on. So I guess you have to deal with my shortcomings, but I'll do my best to maybe slow down a little. And when I get carried away, usually that's when maybe it gets a little faster than it should, right? So I'll try to keep that in mind, but I don't want to become sort of what I'm looking for a word, unengaged. I like to just if I get an emotion and I go with it because there's something that triggers me, or not in this, that let's use the word trigger, right? Doesn't matter. So it should be sort of honest. So I like it to be honest, but I can still keep a little pacing that makes it slightly less easier for the listener to handle, right? Okay, charity and the division of kindness. Another possibility exists, or at least used to, which is the division of kindness. This is not the same as direct charity, but represents an accumulation of voluntary social indebtedness. Imagine a street with a kindly spinster named Elizabeth, unmarried but big-hearted, who organizes games for children, makes them snacks, babysits for little or no money, volunteers to help people, brings food to the sick, and visits the elderly. This kindness is wonderful and deeply inspiring to behold, and it is of great value to the entire community. Elizabeth provides an essential glue that holds everyone together. Of course, all the time Elizabeth spends being kind and generous. I have to take that once more. Of course, all the time Elizabeth spends being kind and generous is the time she is not spending making money. So she ends up poor, but with great credit in the infinite bank of social exchanges. After years of kindness, Elizabeth may fall ill or be in danger of losing her house, or simply have a great desire to see Alaska before she dies. Innately recognizing the great debt they owe her, the neighbors may very well decide to pay for her treatment, or save her house, or fund her cruise. Her help along the way has allowed her neighbors to focus more on making money. They have more money because Elizabeth was more kind. When she is in need, they can take some of the excess money her kindness helped them to make and return it to her. This is not exactly charity, since Elizabeth's kindness within the community was not exactly charity to begin with. Furthermore, if we assume that she is much better at being kind than making money, while others in the neighborhood are better at making money than being kind. Well, I'm stopping in mid-sentence here, but this is sort of a fairy tale country, right? Everybody works from self-interest. If Elizabeth wants to help others, it's because she wants something out of that help. It's not the help exactly that triggers her, but the feeling she gets from doing the help. And I have more than once experienced people who actually more or less enforce their so-called help on others so they can be in that helping situation, just like Mother Teresa, almost forcing children to be helpless so she could help them, right? It's sort of a misguided, largely Christian way of thinking, right? So this unselfish serving of the community, right? Well, yeah, all right, but then people, he also indicates that, okay, but when she falls ill, they should sort of come around and help her. Okay, so they're indebted to her. No, she did it out of kindness, not because you wanted something in return, right? And if she sacrifices her money-making possibilities for being kind instead, well, that's her choice. Nobody says she should be kind, right? So these gray areas of just be careful. Even kind people aren't really that kind when it all comes down, right? They're functioning out of self-interest, right? It's just covered up by this smoke screen of kindness. So either they feel alone, or they want to do this or do that, right? And then they do this free work, but who does free work without getting paid some way or another, right? Nobody does anything for free. It doesn't mean that must be money involved in it, but nobody does anything for free. They expect to get rewarded some way or another. Otherwise, they are actually irrational. And my point is, nobody is irrational. They are rational because they expect to get some reward or another for whatever it is they do, right? Okay. Then we can label this division of kindness. This form of largely cashless economy is how neighborhoods used to function, as did marriages and the raising of children. It's simplistic. There were unwritten debts in this, right? Mothers used to stay home and invest countless hours raising their children. In return, their adult children would take care of them when their parents got old. Wives used to stay home. Husbands used to make money and share it with their wives. Was this charity? Of course not, because wives were running a household and raising children, which is perhaps the most essential service in the human economy. For without this service, none of us would be here to make money in the fading remnants of the free market. Even child raising has elements of the division of kindness. Parents who keep their promises to their children have every right to expect their children to keep their word in return. Why? No. No. Don't start moralizing, right? When you're stating something that means some person has to act or speak or promise or anything, you are moralizing, in my opinion, right? Don't do that. Don't moralize in a book about arguments, in my opinion, right? Because then you have to refer to a perfect moral principle first, right? Otherwise, you might be ordering people to do something that is immoral, right? That wouldn't be very nice, right? Parents who respect their children have every right to expect reciprocal respect. Why? So this social credit system, I don't give a shit about your social credit system, right? Bestowing kindness grants us the right to expect kindness. Children are largely raised to be moral, though through the imprinting of their parents' good behavior. Well, parents' good behavior. Do you have any idea how much abuse there is in the world of children? And if they are raised to be moral through the imprinting of their parents' good behavior, you can't experience and behavior, right? It must be their good actions, right? It can't be behavior, because behavior is not something that exists. You can even argue whether or not an action exists, but at least there are some objects involved in an action. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an action, right? So a behavior is an interpretation of actions classified into a certain category of actions that has a specific purpose. So how do they imprint a behavior, right? What is that? Is that if the parent do the same thing all the time, they get the left foot out of the bed every time they raise from the bed, right? So the children think, okay, that's an imprint. I will take the left foot out of the bed every time they get out of bed, right? And if they're left-handed when they eat their cornflakes, the parent, okay, then children will, eat with the left hand when they eat cornflakes. Is that what you're talking about? It's just too loose, right? It's not philosophically rigid. And through the rational expectation of reciprocity for virtue. Well, what are these rules? Who are you to tell anybody what can be potentially expected between parents and children? Bullshit. The vast majority of human interaction fall into this non-cash benevolence economy, and our failure to recognize this is threatening civilization itself. We are increasingly substituting state power for the argument. Okay, charity and punishment. Those in a free society who make bad decisions and will not mend their ways should not be helped anymore. Should not. Now there's a commandment. You're starting to moralize. Did you explain what moral principle you're working from, right? And the validity of it? Because you haven't proven any validity in any. You may think you have, and your fans and your acolytes may think that you have, but you haven't. And I have deconstructed your ethics. Your proof of your ethics, and it sucks, right? So I'm not going to take it seriously, to be honest, right? None of your moral statements so far, I'm going to take them seriously, because you have nothing to have it in, right? It is the voluntary nature of charity that gives it its peculiar power to improve both individuals and societies. But there is no both individuals and societies. A society is an artificial label put on a group of individuals. So you can't make a dichotomy between individual and societies. That's also something you yourself have pointed out. Then why are you using this kind of argument? It's fucking stupid. As mentioned above, arguments without negative repercussions are worse than useless. They discredit civilization as a whole. Yeah, but they will come automatically, and not least by ostracization. Ostracization. Well, if people start to behave badly, you will avoid them, and then they won't get whatever it is they want from you, right? Okay, if you cannot be fired, you tend to not work hard. If you suffer few, if any, negative consequences for bad decisions, you tend not to make better decisions. Sparks fly from the sharpening of blade. It is no accident that many university professors have tenure. They basically cannot be fired. And very easy work weeks, months off in the summer, six-figure salaries, regular sabbaticals, conferences in exotic places, huge pensions and benefits, and other such tasty goodies. In a truly free market, would there be people who work longer hours for less pay to taste the deep pleasures of extracting young and eager minds? I'm sure there would be, but universities do not operate in a free market environment. Government accreditation and grants, unions and subsidized student loans all dissolve market discipline. Teachers and professors are not paid by the argument. Is it any wonder that they scorn and attack the free market, voluntary interactions, and free speech so often? Voluntary charity is an essential part of the argument. And remember, the argument is defined by the ability to leave the negotiation without violence. The government welfare state is not part of the argument. Since you cannot leave, I'm wondering, is this the argument actually the perfect moral principle? The argument or the principle to rule all other principles, right? Because if you need to argue against it, it's already upon you, right? If you need to argue, no, don't take my money, right? The money is already halfway out of your wallet, right? So the moral principle is that which guides you such that you don't end up in a situation where your money is halfway out of your wallet and you have to start to argue, right? So in a paradise of moral and rigidity and moral principle that is perfect and so on, there wouldn't be really that much need for an argument, would there? You just go about your day and say, okay, that's an elephant. I need that car. That's my car. People would try to avoid ending up in an argument, because arguing would be an indication that we are just about to violate the perfect moral principle, right? So he's saying he's working on that borderline between things being moral or becoming immoral. So that's where the moral principle is being violated. He's looking at the point where all the cars leave the road and end in the ditch, and later end in the ditch, right? He's looking, okay, that's where the car leaves the road, and then it might end up somewhere down in the ditch, right? So he's saying the argument is that line on the side of the road that the car has to stay. When the line is functioning well, the cars will stay on the road, right? And if you're not doing the argument well, the cars might very well end up in the ditch. So in my opinion, the moral principle is that which ultimately would make argument superfluous. You wouldn't need to argue, right? You can say that if you're talking to someone and planning to do something, making a company or whatever it is, right? Asking someone out to a movie, is that an argument? I mean, okay, small talk, trying to figure out how to put a company together. That's not really that kind of argument I'm talking about, and we're talking about here. We are talking about the huge problems in the world, right? He's not trying to tell people how to argue about how to put a company together, right? So teachers, how far did I get? Teachers and professors, voluntary charity is an essential part of the argument. And remember, the argument is defined by the ability to leave the negotiation without violence. Okay, the common welfare state is not part of the argument, since you cannot leave the negotiation or refuse to contribute to the wealth transfer. No, that's correct. That's a big problem. Absolutely. So that's why I'm saying, are you really talking about a moral principle rather than an argument, right? Is a moral principle the perfect argument? Might want to think about that, right? If you don't pay your taxes at some point, you will most likely stare right down the barrel of the state power. This is the price we face for abandoning the argument in favor of force. We no longer help the poor, but rather entrap them. We no longer coach people out of making bad decisions. We subsidize even worse decisions. The poor do not always have to be with us, contradicious, but they sure as hell will be as long as we avoid the argument in favor of the state. Well, he just brought in Jesus, right? Of all the people he could mention, there's a huge list of, great philosophers, let's say, but Jesus is the one we mentioned, right? Okay. The argument and parroting, let me see how long that is. I think I'll save that. I'm a little tired, so I'll save that one for later. So see you next time.